Bronze Age mindset contains of 4 chapters and a prologue. You are now listening to the 4th chapter. Click in the right above corner to listen to the full audiobook. Part 4. A Few Arrows. 63. Giving Freedom to Women. An Impossibility. With the liberation of women in the 19th century, the West has given itself an infection from which it can't recover without the most terrible convulsions and the most thorough purgative measures. What the freedom of women means in practice is the domination of mankind by the demagogues who can rally the lower orders of the spirit. Because there is no world in which the women can act as a political unit. Liberation of women means freedom and power for financiers, lawyers, purveyors of comforts in and outside government, employers who whore out your wife and daughters. It has been the greatest weakening and cell-phone a civilization has ever visited on itself. But in the end, is this so different from democracy as such? Yes. Because the liberation of women makes democracy into a terminal disease. One that doesn't just end a particular government, but the civilization. 64. If you wonder how mankind fell from the high times of the Renaissance and the age of exploration to our times of mediocrity and repression. I can only tell you this, that our age is the norm in history. It takes great efforts and much good luck to be able to surpass the dirty ape and rat inside us all. Most of mankind never left the regime of deformity, and it's no surprise that this morass is returning. It's just a reversion to the norm. That said, there does seem to be something especially menacing about developments in our age. The ubiquity of this leviathan, the inability to escape it. Everywhere you might become a hermit, you are reminded of it, it intrudes everywhere. And so the very success of the great men of 400 years ago, their foundation of a new world, the great expansion of human knowledge and know-how. This ended up setting the stage for our trash world. They succeeded beyond what they could expect, and that success is what allowed the profusion of the lower types of mankind. In nature the vital part of mankind would rule, and in the beginnings of many societies it does. Military brotherhoods of men rule, and physical force as well as force of personality, charisma, draw the rest in an orbit around those who possess these in the highest degree. This is all by a natural and secret pull, by instinct. There is a magic to charisma that does this, and the military monarchical organization, the rule of the warlord, comes from desire for this in the nature of all, not from reflection and abstraction. Unfortunately, some things conspire to end this original condition of mankind, which is itself no paradise and is full of strife, suffering and problems. These things are, first of all, the very success of these men in securing the conditions of life and comfort for the rest of the community. Second, the ascent, within this peacetime, of the priest, the shaman, the schemer and the matriarch, which slowly usurp power away from the brotherhoods of young men and their captains. Spinoza explains the corruption of the Jewish people in just this way. The Hebrew Republic was in fact a military regime of the type I say here, a rule of the captains. But the priests took this power away and corrupted the nation to weakness. In same way something happened to the Aryans in India and in many other places. This state of things doesn't need to be so. The men of religion and those of power have many interests in common and can rule together. But it often happens that the men of power become decadent and let the state drift into the hands of those who can't rule and who start to resent them for this abdication. Women become also very aggressive once real and relaxed manhood atrophies. If you imagine that women in the Muslim world, for example, are sweet and feminine. They are hungry viragos of iron will. The feminist Muslima will be a figure of much importance among them. The men in Arabia will turn gay. The Vietnamese or Chinese grandmother has her knee on the neck of the son-in-law. Thus everywhere we see that the very comforts and safety produced by the best men leads to the usurpation of society by those parts of the human spirit that are oriented instead toward a different kind of life, that everywhere that mode of the East wins out. And usually wins out very quickly. And in the West, whose special fate has been confused for history or progress of the entire species, this development has taken place through the promotion of logos or reason, and all the manifestations of this. The adulation of empty words, of legalism as a guide for social and political life, of the cult of science that is very far from real science. All of this has been a cover for the ascent of the blob human, of the lower orders of the spirit, and is instead delivering, not just the West, but all of mankind, to a condition of domestic brokenness and servility. Very concretely you see in feminism the return of pre-Aryan matriarchy. The Great Earth Mother, originally some kind of half-human half-cockroach creature resplendent with horrid eggs like big Amazon centipede. This seeks to reabsorb you. Of all the things that you blame for the decrepit times we live in, feminism and the liberation of women is both the proximate and the ultimate cause. Nothing so ridiculous as the liberation of women has ever been attempted in the history of mankind. It is an act of complete insanity, disguised as logic, reason, presented in the most absurd legalisms about supposed rights. The modern socialisms, the expansion of the power of the state that squashes all initiative and all life, the hypocrisy of all political life in our time. All of this is to be attributed to the participation of women in political life. I don't complain about the freedom or degeneracy that supposedly comes from this arrangement. That's all misdirection and self-flattery. The state we live in is as repressive as any Oriental tyranny. But its hypocrisy is that it hides its force under the delusion of egalitarian ideals and legalistic procedures inconsistently applied. It is not women actually being free, but their legal freedom, a practical fiction, being used by a hidden power to oppress, to dispossess, to intimidate and extort. It took 100 years of women in public life for them to almost totally destroy a civilization. But you would be spurred to think that this problem can be solved by taking away women's voting power, forcing them into the home, or some such thing. The presence of women in public life is a spear with two tips and can be turned in the enemy with some ease. Women, after all, can still, even in the most debased condition, be made to call on their deep passions by a great leader. They voted for Hitler, Mussolini, and many others, with some enthusiasm. The enemy who freed them has made use of a great weapon. He has increased his power immensely and introduced a war into the house and life of every man. But this enemy also made a gamble and I believe, ultimately, a mistake, because women more than others will set their bodies on fire with passion for a savior and be willing to abandon the fear and love of comfort on which the modern state depends. The more than others, out of a wild and stupid enthusiasm. 65. How was it possible for women to become free at some point in the 19th century? How did this agitation come about? From where comes the genocracy that rules, not just as in tribal societies covertly, but that now pretends also to be in the public sphere and to demand rights? Who was there in the first place to give rights? And of what use is a right if it's not also a privilege? The answer to all this is a little bit more unpleasant. It's only because women lost all respect for the males of the time that there could be any pretext like feminism or women's suffrage in the first place. The loss of respect in general marks the modern age since 1800 or so. The loss of respect and authority, for example, that came when industrialists and bankers replaced the warrior nobility. As decadent as the latter had become, this class had never really lost its grace of manner, its beauty and magnificence and glamour. This made the common man more eager to submit or to accept such leadership. But who could accept the rule of the dour economic creature that took the lead in the States at the end of the 18th century? This is why Napoleon was such an enigma for so many. He represented a man out of time, something completely unexpected in the age of middle-class mediocrity and hypocritical democracy that was just then coming about. For this reason all the higher spirits of the 19th century, all the great artists, the writers, they threw themselves at the feet of his memory. He seemed to represent the possibility of higher aspirations in our time. You can read Stendhal for this spirit. Napoleon was an escape from the domination of the bugman that was just then beginning to take hold of the nations. Now, don't imagine I will attack the bourgeois. We've declined so far even from the level of the bourgeois of that age. In our time the desolation is almost complete. This is why it's so ridiculous to hear these conservatives yap on about honor, or glory, or sacrifice, or any of this garbage. The respect in all institutions and all leadership classes, and all traditional authority has already been lost long ago, and for good reason. It's impossible for the erased males to command any respect from the people, and still less from their women. Feminism then is the revolt of women against the outrage of democracy. They have been in a revolt against the inability of the bugmen to command authority or respect. And you must understand that there is no bottom to this freedom or revolution. There won't be any opportunity to say I told you so. They will never learn a lesson from their foolishness. And there isn't the insecurity you have put them in. The calamity that will surely follow from going down this path will not be a teachable moment to anyone. There isn't the beta, but you're wrong to think it was ever any different. No. Great civilizations and cultures were never founded nor kept alive by betas. The nerdoids who have taken over much of the right have brainwashed you to this view, but it's wrong. Women never loved the shopkeeper, the timid merchant with a nasal voice, and no, not even the clockmaker or craftsman. They have always loved the knight, the sailor in love with wild ideas of the sea, the adventurer and pirate. And it is right that they loved these men, and that, with the coming of the rule of the bugmen, they would try to seek their liberation from unworthy men and the boring society they were building. That this resentment was manipulated itself by the satanic power that rules our time, and that through this very drive for freedom woman became enslaved more than she had been before, is beside the point. You won't be able to make women see reason and love a beta civilization. A fabrication of the HBD cuckold crowd of our time. Women will love you if you are a warrior. And they will help, through the entirely retarded mechanism of democracy, to elect men of glamour and charisma who are our only immediate hope against the machine that runs our garbage world. Trump, for all his hesitations, is only the beginning. He has shown the path insofar as woman is concerned. The mob also is a woman. Now imagine a man of Trump's charisma, but who is not merely beholden to the generals, but one of them, and able to rule and intimidate them as well as seduce the many. So far we have only had Gracchi. But Caesars and Napoleons are sure to follow. 66. A man of great charisma who can seduce the people with a wild spirit and break through the rule of the pervasive bureaucracy media complex is our best hope for the immediate problem, and maybe our only hope. Such a man might be among you and, in any case, he will need help. Our enemy has so much spread. He is everywhere. He's in your home even, and he's inside you. The domain of the fight has extended everywhere now. Therefore any answer must be on multiple fronts, and each one calls for a different strategy and different type of talent and man. I fear that many of you are actually autists and spurgs and don't want to see this. There is no one fight and no one solution, and what you want in the end or as ideal may require different plan than facing imminent threat. For the latter you can make alliance with people who otherwise wouldn't be your friends. I believe that democracy is the final cause of all the political problems I describe here, but in the short run democracy, the will of the people, is on our side because the democracies have been hijacked by a stupid and corrupt elite. The nations face extinction and an era of permanent civil war because this elite wants to pillage and wants to flood them with the shit of the world. This is the immediate threat, and on this you can be allied with people who otherwise may not shoot for the same star you do. If Ann Coulter or Pat Buchanan were in charge, you would get 99% of what you want. Therefore use them as models to solve the problems that face you, and don't scare the peoples with crazy talk if you want to move things politically. Let the normies have their normal lives and paint our enemies as the crazies. Which they are. And as the corrupt vermin they are. If you haven't compromised yourself, go into political life maybe and use Trump as a model for success. Those of you who choose this path, if you like this book or the other things I say, should denounce it and disavow me if ever asked about it, and denounce also all other crazy ideas. You must have an instinct for how much normies are able to take. It isn't even a question of getting them to where you want gradually. I don't think they're able to get very far at all. But they can be moved to defend themselves from the grip of the global slave state, which I also hate, although for different reasons. If an ethnostate is your ideal, or if it's Renaissance Switzerland or ancient Egypt. Fine. If you intend to go public and try something politically, work now instead, so that America and Europe don't become Bosnia or South Africa. People who try to mislead you from such things and try to encourage you to talk in public instead about abstractions like ethnostate, dork ideological constructs like Eurasianism, anachronistic slogans like blood and soil, that never had any historical attraction to Anglos and Americans. These people are spurgs or very often federal informants, or manipulated by such. By all means study such things, believe in them, troll with them, let them guide your final aims, but know what is possible in the normie political sphere, and don't become the clown of ZOG like Nellen, and so many others did. If they were serious people they would have never come in public and encouraged young men to go on marches where they could be identified and tracked for life. Know when the snake is defending itself. Don't be a patsy. Your models must be those that have worked. Trump, Orban, the Italian movement's now ascendant, Sebastian Kurz and his party in Austria. You don't see these people marching around in hotel bellboys uniforms with a Sonnenrad and talking about the Jewish question and this other kind of role play. It's true that in the end, my aims here and those of someone like Orban have little or nothing in common. If they were successful, all they would be able to do is re-establish the same world of sheep that existed 100 years ago, maybe inoculated against the latest degradations, but nothing very great. Still, I think it's better for the nations to be well-tended, happy sheep than to be reduced to teeming piles of starving rats. This, anyway, is my advice for those who want to go into normie politics and have a relatively normie life, and there's nothing wrong with that, it's even a great necessity. I've written this book, however, because this may not satisfy some of us, and I wanted to talk about the world in the coming decades and what paths may open for a different way. 67. Too much is already said about the evils of suburbs, but I think the danger of such places for modern civilized man is so great that it must be repeated. On the other hand, it's important not to take this too far. The Europeans live in the center of their cities and are politically and socially in just as bad or worse situations. Still, I think it's easier for them to fix their problems and to avert the greatest dangers, should they arrive. It's easier because in these places the rightful citizens of the nation still own their cities. I don't see any evidence that the tax base of America moved to the suburbs by choice. Their inner cities were taken away from them not, as is imagined, by blacks, but by the politicians and their handlers who found it more profitable to replace middle-class citizens with an underclass. The space to which they've been segregated and to which they have to commute is, I think, a form of absolute hell to raise children in, especially boys. There is no freedom of motion except regimented activities, they are always watched by caretakers of some kind. The places are of incredible ugliness, which takes away also from the will to discover new things at all. There are no nooks and corners where boys can form gangs, be away from prying eyes of parents and others, and have the feeling that they are exploring and owning territory, as there is in the city and in the countryside. America has successfully portioned off its historical population, its rightful citizens, and its tax base, in work camps and dormitories. That is what the modern American city is. An economic zone arranged much like a work camp or concentration camp if you want. It would be trivial for the French security services to shut off access to the banlieue as infested by turds, and it would be just as trivial for American security services to shut off access to the suburbs and hold the middle class by the neck. I think the reason the suburbs are hateful to the raising of boys is also the reason they are most objectionable in general. Namely that while in the countryside or the city, a restive population would be able to hold their territory and challenge a power, should the need arise, such a thing is impossible in the suburbs. Suburbs are living arrangement for slaves and subjects. 68. Social justice. Disgusting parasitism, dressed up in rags of words so worn out and pea-stained, even their defenders are sick of the smell. They say it half-mouthed and pleading. Just look at them during the Occupy rallies, hoping to siphon off respect. The need to be respected is sign of very low and worm-like condition of spirit. The tantrums of the coddled and domesticated, of no force. No force behind it, just the opinions of the leftover, the prattling of guilt and begging. Not even the Marxist engine of the worker. What worker? They have contempt for the worker. The force and confidence in his labor, in the place of his labor in history that the Bolshevik had is gone, now it's the lumpen using his language, unconvincingly. Dependent on the Leviathan, and therefore its tool. Social justice. But why only social? Why set your sights so low? You mean just the opinions of the many? Who cares? Here is my vision of the true justice, the justice of nature. The zoos opened, predators unleashed by the dozens, hundreds, 4,000 hungry wolves rampaging on streets of these hive cities, elephants and bison stampeding, the buildings smashed to pieces, the cries of the human bug shearing through the streets as the Lord of Beasts returns. Manhattan, Moscow, Peking reduced to ruins overgrown by vines and forest, the haunt of the lynx and coyote again. The great cesspool slums, Calcutta, Nairobi, all the fetid latrines of the world covered over by mudslides, overgrown with thick jungle, this is justice. Lisbon to me always seemed city still inhabited just out of vanity. Let loose hundreds of tigers, companies of rhinoceros, with strong engine of spirit revving in their deep chests, let them bring the justice of the volcano to this world of trash. Bless the passing of the Shoggoth. 69. There is story from Heian period in Japanese history that I always found amazing. Japan was still ruled by the imperial court and there were local administrators and so on, like any oriental centralized despotism. But there was also warrior class. They inherited this from some steppe invasions that changed their society a few centuries before. Anyway, as always happens, the imperial bureaucrats grew useless and weak, and by the end of this age, all the actual physical power was with the samurai. What I find amazing is how long it took them to figure out they no longer had to listen to the weak commands of the imperial hierarchy, and that they were actually the rulers. Words like legitimacy, soft power, rights, or, in their time honor, duty, divine right and so on are all delusions meant to distract and obscure men of power from their own strength and aims and put them in service to someone else. Such men are more likely than others to be driven by notions of honor and responsibility. And this sense is therefore very easy to abuse. And such men can be manipulated for some time. Eventually they do realize, however, that they don't have to listen and that they are actually the ones who rule. This moment, when the game is up, the moment of revelation, is what I've always found very amazing. In the modern world everything moves much faster. I expect that not long from now such men will awaken in the West and I suppose other parts of the world and wonder why for so long they had listened to complete cretins give orders. And give orders too with such weak pretexts, much weaker than the bureaucracy of Imperial Japan. In Fiji the natives became relatively recently outnumbered because 100 years before the English imported their favorite cheap labor, the Tamils. Eventually these outbred the natives and became the majority. So under democracy rules, they took over the state. The natives, however, still controlled the military. They saw no reason why they must follow this democracy into giving their lands away to aliens brought in by oppressors. So they took over the state and did so very easily. I think it's inevitable that this will become the rule all over the world and very soon. Democracy and ethnic diversity don't mix, but the ethnic nationalists are wrong when they think that the result of all this will be secession. Low-grade ethnic warfare is a terrible thing, but to break up entire nations into smaller pieces, as much as the city-state is to my taste, isn't likely to happen. You must look to South Africa, where the whites and coloreds could have asked for their own state in Cape Town and agitated for this, but instead they wanted to keep the country together. The reason for this is that any such secession would have meant giving up all parts of the country rich in gold, diamonds, and many other things. South Africa is an extreme case in secession, where a minority is 5 or 10% of the population. Here it might happen. But it's a net loss to have the Boers migrate out of the land their ancestors tamed and built, and it would be a net loss in America if it had to happen, what some of you want, to cede the Southwest to Mexico, or whatever other schemes are discussed. If indeed you do manage to get a white population that is as mobilized and self-aware as you want, they won't feel it a great victory to give up land and resources their ancestors won by their valor. The greatest president was Polk. But what's likely to happen long before any mobilization by white populations in their home countries is military rule. Democracy will go before pure ethnostates are formed. I think this happened many times in history in ages of national decline, not just because of ethnic or religious diversity, but for many other reasons, and most of all, because the military form of government is natural to human species. Those generals will be most successful who mix power with personal flair, like Duterte Perón did. This is very difficult in America because of the types of men who get promoted in the military. Some will be able to affect, however, the charisma of Roman stern old man. 70. Given the inevitability of military government, I see already how nationalists and many similar men, sympathetic to the cause of freedom and high life, will join the armed forces and rise through the ranks, and my guess is that many are already doing this. In some way this had already happened, and at the middle ranks the armed forces are still relatively full of patriots throughout the Western world. In France the military and security services, including the CRS, support the National Front of Le Pen, overwhelmingly. It's only a matter of time. In the Anglo world it's somewhat more complicated. The upper ranks have long been purged of men who could offer resistance to the hidden hands that rule. It started with the tailhook scandal, and even before then, and only accelerated after. Even at the level of captain or major, many men are traditional conservatives and not exactly nationalists. I think it's unnecessary to address such men directly. Events alone will convince them. But many are being persecuted as it is and run out of the military in the same way that police departments are being purged. This process is very slow. It won't work out well in the end for the lords of lies. All the technology in the world won't save a diverse military if it should ever be in a conflict. They'll turn the missiles on themselves by accident or run submarines into the ocean floor, as has already happened in South Africa. Still, America is pretty well isolated from danger, and you fool yourself if you think they will reform anything, even if they suffer disastrous defeats abroad. They fear men of power within the country more than they do any foreign army. It's difficult to solve this problem. The military is already so full of homophagotry that it will be very unpleasant for any man who is a man to join its ranks at the moment. He might have a hard time advancing in its hierarchy, even affecting the views of a traditional religious conservative or a mainstream Trumpist, which is, I suppose, as far as you could go right now. I would hate also to see any free man killed or maimed in the service of this military that's been turned into a Hessian merc force for Gulf nabobs, for various ethnic groups, for the idiotic schemes of international financiers, and the benefit of machine politicians looking to advance their families' fortunes abroad. Then there is also the extreme boredom you should expect from any kind of military life, which even under the best circumstances consists in busy work. That said, military training is very valuable. Even in a situation, precisely in the case where men of any worth will have a tough time becoming generals and such. Then it will be even more valuable. Military training and the brotherhood with other men in battle that comes from it is a lifelong advantage and a great benefit to any cause. I can't give advice to anyone for how to live, but those who would be willing to deal with the evils of the modern military and are aware of all the drawbacks, but still find themselves suited for it, would do a great good for themselves and for their peoples if they joined. It goes without saying that they will have to practice good judgment and discretion while in service, But the military can't simply be abandoned to Mohawk Latinx traps and neo-Leninist activists. Nationalists, I have no doubt, will join and attempt to reform both the ranks and the academies in the Western world. Then there are also things like the French Foreign Legion, although the discipline they practice is terrible. It lasts 7 years, and they reserve the right to pursue you in any country if you desert. Many ex-SS men and other Germans from World War II joined the Legion and fought in Vietnam, and some committed suicide because of the rigors of this unit. Although it's possible now that they've relaxed somewhat. 71. Everything that is said now about Russia is pure projection. In fact, it's America and the Western world that is run by spooks and intel agencies. They've placed their assets and compromised patsies in the corporate world, no less than in other government agencies and among elected politicians. Many, like Obama for example, are entirely creations of this or that faction inside the security system. These in turn are allied to oligarchs and often to foreign interests and powers, so that it's hard to think many Western nations have anything but a parody of freedom and national sovereignty. Representative democracy plus a bureaucratic state is often criticized by conservatives as destructive of personal freedom and initiative, which it is, but given that most people who go into public life are poor and weak-minded, it also just means indirect rule by spooks, oligarchs, and whatever foreign nation or interest can funnel more money or influence or threat here or there. Many of these people in the West screaming about Russia are puppets of China or the Gulf states, even when they're not directly on the take or compromised, they expect sinecures and great wealth that will come in the future. Most of the media is similarly compromised, although the average schmuck journalist is probably deluded by the platitudes of free press and the humanitarian doxies that have been banged in their heads. Inside head they have central vacuole full of fluid, no brain. I have no doubt that things like Pizzagate are real, simply because, if I was a spook or a rich man with spooks available, I'd find it very easy to compromise the officious, status-hungry low people who have been attracted to government in our time. These people arrive in the capital cities with a hungry look in the eye and, being full of the feeling that they're in on things and that they've made it, have a very tough time controlling their appetites or behavior. Many are chosen and groomed precisely because they begin with demented appetites to begin with. This isn't to say there aren't patriotic factions within the security services that actually run the West, or patriotic oligarchs who can't offshore their wealth, and whose interest is in some sense then tied to the land and the people. I foresee a time anyway when nationalists, those who are capable of it, will begin to join these services. They will do themselves, their friends, and their country a great good through this. Some who are suited to math and technology will no doubt join those types of agencies. Others are already learning foreign languages. Tibetan has many uses. But there are other languages and area studies for those who go to college to study and do well in. Arabic, Russian, Persian, Chinese, Indonesian. Many opportunities. Given the very low talent pool and government are available for recruitment, they will be able to join those other types of agencies, of which there are a few, with some ease. Here it would be necessary more than in the military to hide one's power level, and even to affect the left internationalist doxy at times. Any nationalist or populist would be wise to affect at most the style of a Mueller, should he want to be on the right. Not all are capable of this, and I think the strain will be considerable. Such people will often have to work alone and remain quite isolated for years, holding their aim and star as a precious hidden possession, and never confuse the short term for the final goal. Few will be able to or want to deal with the nonsense. This has been the problem of the Anglo-conservatives all along, though. They've always preferred to get a tan, play tennis, and make money. They've wanted to be left alone, so that the state was taken over by vermin. I expect such things will change, regardless of what I or anyone else says, simply because some people want to survive and not to die out. They will no doubt slowly, one way or another, join and change the face of such agencies. The power of the modern world remains, for the foreseeable future, in such agencies. A fateful comet like a Caesar and Napoleon is a hard thing to hope for. And such a man would need allies, anyway. 72. Government work can be too boring for men of adventure. Some say that the CIA, for example, exaggerates its incompetence in movies or in known events. The failure of 9/11s of Iraq, their endless humiliations at the hands of the Soviets to hide its true power and appear weaker than it is. But I think this isn't true, and if you've met ex-CIA people you'll understand that the rumors about their disability aren't exaggerated at all. After James Jesus Angleton they were thoroughly fucked in every hole by the Soviets and others. All his warnings came true. He was a unique American, of rare secretive character and a people that enjoys openness and display. For this he is now maligned in mean-spirited movies. He wasn't very typical of his people, the Anglo-Saxon, and I suppose it's possible that through his Spanish blood there came a strain of Habsburg court intrigue or something like this. The Russians and others are very good at intelligence work because they grow up in a world of secrecy and learn to take great joy in subterfuge of this kind. Most Americans who try this are just playing games and affecting a manner. Full of Mormons and various cripplets who put on a high wasp manner, full also of soccer moms and neuters, the intelligence services are in fact quite incompetent despite their considerable power. Both can be true. And you can see this in their very clumsy attempts to affect public opinion inside America. I won't talk about speculation over false flag attacks and such, which I'm sure happen. But it's without a doubt that they've tried to get into the meme business and had units dedicated to this kind of visual propaganda, especially during the last election. We all saw their efforts and we laughed. I think the biggest threat the right presented to this system came from something like 4chan, which showed it can be an intelligence agency of its own and far superior to what the formal spooks could do. How they located obscure objects, places, and people from photos is something that formally trained agents couldn't normally do. The memes put a spike of fear in the hearts of all the constipated spooks. A couple of images spread by Ricky Vaughn or some channers made the news and were many times more effective than the government's own propaganda efforts, and you can see, in shows like Homeland and others, the really titanic hatred these people had for the army of right-wing autists that messed up their plans. They work hard to dox, for this reason. You must understand where your strengths lie. If government or military work isn't appropriate, learn this art of the visual communication and share it with your friends, work with each other to perfect it. Don't be lame. Learn to make videos and photos. There are various tools around, many editing programs. You can start with cheap camera if you need. Work in groups. In labs to develop, perfect, and target these videos and images. I assure you this frightens them and is many, many times more effective than marching in public and playing the clown they want you to play. The long game of persuading the public is far from won. Keep the eye on the task, far from accomplished. To discredit authorities, to mock all public pieties, to show the leaders of government, bureaucracy, finance, corporations, big tech, and media for the pathetic ghouls they are. Many gains have been made lately, but their dishonor in the eyes of the normies is far from accomplished. When they try to make you expose yourself and to make positive claims, they win. Keep up the pressure of true samizdat. 73. Some people like to meet and display in public, and I think this can be done, if done well. But there are very few groups that do this well. They exist all over the world, a couple in America and Europe, some in South America and in Japan. The few nationalist organizations that do it well have much care for appearance and also don't engage in ideologies, symbols and behaviors that are bizarre or hostile to the customs and wishes of the people. A Japanese nationalist can invoke Shinto imagery and oppose this nationalist mode to the foreign religion of Buddhism. But that's because these two traditions have been in a push-pull game throughout the history of that country, and still are. But no independent pagan tradition exists in the Western world, and play acting in that way is going to fail. Offending Christians and political movements is stupid when they're one of the last bastions against a common enemy. If their beliefs are corrupted, they can be reformed. Above all, I believe that any public movement will be most effective if it is not political at all and remains implicit. I think there can be much good done in public, but should be promoted in the form of a social movement, not a political one. Nationalists must present a healthy alternative to the eternal rule of ugliness in our time. Promote nature, beauty, physical fitness, the preservation of high traditions of literature and art. In regards to the latter, it's even a necessity, because there's no school or university that will give you a worthwhile education. There are a variety of ways to approach this, but I think given the collapse of the Boy Scouts, that a scouting and nature preservation movement would be one of the best. Hiking and the protection, preservation, and admiration of public and national parks would put youth in the wilderness and inspire a sense of boundlessness and awe in them. It would teach them many skills, build camaraderie, and emphasize the connection between the people and the land, both for the participants and as a matter of image for others. It's without a doubt that any public organization will be infiltrated by feds, hostiles, and agents provocateurs, and therefore it's necessary to avoid and condemn any imagery or message of violence, and to ostracize people who exhibit tendencies in that direction, or who try to convince others to idiotic action. One can do this at the same time that such groups can engage in self-defense martial arts training and indeed, in an urban setting, work for the creation of private boxing and wrestling clubs. The risks are considerable either way, but it's not out of the question that through the path of the promotion of health and beauty you will be able even to persuade feds to your side. They too can self-improve. This would be a movement of peace. The right can at the moment furthermore easily take over the doctrine of peace, of non-intervention abroad, and of the protection of nature, and these things would be great achievements. This would go some way to convincing youth to your side. I would also recommend that you don't engage in outright racism of a useless sort, for example, the deliberate exclusion of friendlies from different races and so on. They would in any case be very few. This can happen at the same time that you openly appeal to white youths and defend them from racial attacks and teach them the greatness of their history and their literary traditions. Women, on the other hand, must be absolutely excluded from such groups and rather encouraged to have their own. The presence of women in any group like this will totally destroy its social function by introducing sexual competition and by the fact that it's in their blood to play on men's misplaced chivalry to cause friction for their own advantage. Such a movement would be a living rebuke to the constrained and low, anxious life promoted by the regime of the crippled. Once developed and with some reach, but maybe even in the beginning, they can engage in local welfare projects of various kinds, for example helping opiate addicts by providing them with gyms and by breathing into them the desire for life, helping old people who are alone, keeping the streets and parks clean, and many other such things. I also think that claiming public spaces in cities should eventually be tried, in the same way that members of Generation Identity in Europe often patrol the subways and streets to show they won't be intimidated. But for this to happen there must be goodwill built first for the public. There will of course be many attacks made on such groups, but what matters is whether the majority will believe them. If you remain firm as a social movement of peace, of the promotion of natural beauty, healthy living, and healthy nationalism, any attacks on such groups can be made to appear for what they are, the fears of the paranoids and hatreds of the resentful and ugly. 74. The equivalent of the meme in political action is the prank. You really can't underestimate the power of a good prank. This can be as little as putting up a funny banner or a witty slogan. Such things don't need to be connected to any formal group, but done in private by yourself or with your friends. The Pitbull ban campaign is a great example of real-life trolling. The "It's okay to be white" stickers were a good idea, at least in the beginning. Those who began to put threatening fonts on them or logos for weirdo organizations ruined that troll very fast. The purpose of all such political action should be the same as mimetic samizdat, which is to make the enemy look ridiculous. You must show them for what they are, which is dour, old, sclerotic, ugly, pedantic. It's good if you show yourself in the opposite light, although not necessary. But in France the Hommes, a traditionalist and manly response to the Feminine, have provided a good model for attractive public action of this sort. They use masks, and anonymity is often an absolute necessity for this kind of thing. But the possibilities of this are boundless, and, even in cases like the "okay to be white" stickers, where the initial message isn't funny, it works because it forces the enemy to take a public position that is widely and justly recognized as evil and resentful. Trump has been very good at this, although it's not hard. He frequently forces his opponents to take the side of the vilest murderers, gang members, of lawlessness and decrepit viciousness. All such actions must be performed unannounced, planned in secret, and carried out with a close group of friends to prevent the enemy from organizing a preemptive action. Remember that they still own many of the cities, and the police forces in these cities, which can be induced to act illegally and to put you in danger. For this reason, and many others, public rallies announced well ahead of time are totally useless, as are public policy speeches and other such wankery. You must of course avoid all violence, and all talk of violence as well, and not fall into the trap they want you to fall into. In a small group of friends you know yourself, it's easier to police who stays and who doesn't, and easier to use your judgment about whether this or that guy is nuts or worse. Remember always to keep eyes on the prize in such action, which is to discredit the enemy and expose his authoritarianism, his stupidity, his slavishness, his corruption. 75. The friends you make are more important, far more important, than the girlfriends or wives you'll have. And actually your girl will admire you for this. Not that you should do it for that reason, but it's an added benefit. Women admire men with great personal projects and who are not beholden to them. If she's your everything and your best friend, she will likely lose respect for you. The greatest sin that nationalists and allies have against the enemy is the fact that the enemy has sowed sexual chaos and has destroyed romance. Our parents' generations are largely responsible for this, but the lords of lies and ugliness who rule our time continue it and use it as their greatest tool of control. So this is the best way to awaken men to the evil and subjection of our time, and, I would say, also many women, who are very unsatisfied. On the other hand, someone who is motivated simply by this problem isn't reliable. There won't be any beta revolution, and betas are unreliable, because they can be easily bought off with a girlfriend, or even a shrew wife, and the parody of a good domestic life. I've seen many men, intelligent and well-educated, but weak in their core and much too concerned with women, who gave up all higher aspirations once a half-decent girl came along. I find it disturbing that so many think this kind of life is a great salvation for you personally or for your race. This is ridiculous. By all means, marry and have children if you want, but don't do it as a political statement or a form of action. Quite aside from the fact that you yourself wouldn't have wanted to be born as part of a demographic war, this isn't a kind of struggle that civilized races, with a need for space and fresh air, can ever win. The idea that whites or Japanese should start vomiting out 6 or 7 children to a vagina like the illiterate slave hordes of Bangladesh or Niger is absurd. For one, it's never going to happen, and it shouldn't. Throughout history we've almost always been outnumbered, and it hasn't been a problem. Immigration restriction, combined with some judicious deportation done gradually, would be enough to secure the homelands of the civilized. If the situation worsens or a time of crisis comes, the eventual abandonment of democracy and other, far sterner measures, including, I expect, the intervention of the military, will take place. Autists having a family or not doesn't matter in a world of billions. The European nations have populations of hundreds of millions and aren't in danger of dying out. So by all means, have a girlfriend and a family, but I fear that too much focus on this as a statement against the program of the enemy is a mistake. Usually a family is the end of a man. This can be both good and bad. But the necessities of caring for a family and the emotional demands usually blind him to anything higher. In case you do have a family, have it because you have great love and lust for a woman. And I would recommend the same for women, abandonment to such instinct if you are lucky enough to have it. Choose by quality of biology and remember that the intellect is inherited from the mother, the character from the father. But once you have a family, don't think this is a political achievement or that it would ever be enough. Continue the mission you have set out for yourself and continue above all the friendships you have formed in service to this higher cause. The friendships you have made meeting each other, in person or online, are the greatest event of the last few years and source for the greatest promise. You must never stop studying and working together or forget the enthusiasm of this discovery. A friendship and struggle for war and a higher cause is something that, more than anything else, can lift you out of the dreadful gravity of this turgid world of shades. 76. Caring too much about food, nutrition, and especially health can be considered something unmanly. A kind of neurotic, hypochondriac fretting more suited to spinsters. On the other hand, in the past the world was not as full of poison as it is now. Nearly all the food is centrally produced, stored in warehouses, and poisoned with mycotoxins and many other things that slowly destroy your essence. Therefore it's important to take measures to protect yourself against this as far as you can. Although it's expensive, the probiotic gastrus has been of great use to many of us. Something else I can recommend is coconut oil and staying in the sun. If you are not a bogjig whose ancestors evolved under permanent cloud cover in northwest Europe, you will usually be able to tan, and the effects of sun are many and very good. You have no excuse. Those who can't tan must supplement with vitamin D3, but also some other things. You begin with 10 minutes in midday sun and work up from there. Usually 30 minutes a day is enough when you can get there. There's much propaganda about tanning. But once you live in tropical areas you can see that even brown people begin to look sickly and have a kind of sallow color if they avoid the sun. You're meant to worship the sun. Remember the Song of New Order. It goes without saying that you must lift weights, and for this there are many different programs, all suited to a different body, different biology, and different aims. In general it's better to lose fat and cut body fat before growing in muscle. But it depends on many things. But a regime of sun and steel is absolutely required for your mood, your aesthetics, for getting the attention of women and the respect of men, and above all for preparation for struggle and war. In ancient Greek cities, only the citizens were allowed to lift weights and work in the gym. Slaves were forbidden. It's no wonder that the robots of Babylon seek to ban gyms for men in our time. The pathetic failure of the swole left, an entirely artificial construct promoted in a pre-planned and coordinated way by formal organs of the left, all of this is very instructive. The occasional exception aside, it's not possible to be swole left today. Any man who improves his body through sun and steel will drift away from the modern left, a program of decrepitude and resentful monstrosity. They know this and are afraid. I have to make this restatement now at the end of this brief manifesto. Many are domestic animals and happy that way. I speak instead to the men who feel stifled by this bug world. People at all times try to domesticate each other. Language is used to clobber and deceive others into submission and domestication. Ideas and arguments and stories are manufactured for the same. The modern world is no different in this regard from any wretched tribal society. I'm sure that Europe prior to the Bronze Age, before the coming of the Aryans, was similar to modern Europe. People lived in communal longhouses and were likely brobitten and ruled by obese mammies who instilled in them socialism and feminism. Most of those so-called males of the longhouse age were probably similar to the modern leftist herb who doesn't lift. Which is why those societies were so easily conquered. The left realizes they look weak and lame, because they are. They know they have nothing to offer youth but submission and lectures. They know they're unsexy and staid. If indeed young leftist men will start lifting and worshipping beauty, they will be forced to leave the left. The bugman pretends to be motivated by compassion, but is instead motivated by a titanic hatred of the well turned out and beautiful. The bugman seeks to bury beauty under a morass of ubiquitous ugliness and garbage. So much of the Pacific and the pristine oceans are now full of garbage and plastic. This garbage is flowing out of cities built on piles of unimaginable filth. The waters are polluted with birth control pills and mind-bending drugs emitted by obese high-fructose corn syrup guzzling beasts. Then of course there is the ugliness of the people. And it's only getting uglier with the crowded, unhygienic new cities of our age, populated by hordes of dwarf-like zombies that are imported for slave labor and political agitation from the fly-swept latrines of the world. People feel they can't escape this, they know this is an aggressive method to demoralize and oppress. When I post my images of vitality in the clear sun of a long noon, they feel a weight lifted off them. Many feel as if they've escaped the gravity of this trash world and returned to a time when the natural beauty of man could be displayed, indicating this is a form of life free to develop its powers. I believe in the right of nature. I'm bored by ideology and by word chopping. The images I post speak for themselves and point to a primal order that is felt by all, in a physical sense. When I or my followers post powerful, beautiful images of male models of unbelievable vitality and youth, our enemies gnash their teeth in envy and hatred, while we are exalted and inspired. The superior, like the handsome Alexander, exert an almost magical effect that draws others to them. Some are drawn to higher action, others to other tasks, but all petty cares are forgotten. There is nothing that needs to be said or elaborated, no need to intellectualize this any more than the natural attraction wolves on the move have for their king, or bees in a hive for their queen. When I post images of godlike men like Pietro Baselli, many are in awe and drawn to emulate. I have inspired many to develop their bodies and physical and spiritual power. I have nothing to say to the frivolous people who have found themselves, maybe bewildered, in positions of influence in media or government, or to the many superfluous who follow them. In the next 100 years and even before, barbaric piratical brotherhoods will wipe away this corrupt civilization, as they did at the end of the Bronze Age. 77. The Star of the Covenant. What is likely then to happen in the long run? I foresee a time, not too far in the future, when the Leviathan will not be able to hold itself together. I expect that the peoples will be able to save themselves from the global slave project that is now promoted. But what will come after is likely to be unsatisfying as well. The nations will escape the danger, but they will return to their peaceful and sheep-like existence. They will need to be protected from getting themselves into the same position as they are now. I believe that at some point, before or after the Troubles, the superior specimens are going to find each other and leave the civilization. They will form fortresses on the edge of the civilized world, in the tropics, from where they will watch the seas. The era of high piracy will return. Such men will develop above all their physical powers and their ability to wage war. They will offer the nation's defense in exchange for a price. Occasionally they will send a great demagogue into the peoples when this becomes necessary. Such men, perched atop these eagles' nests, will have the territory of a new frontier again and a life that suits them. Science will be liberated from the constraints of caring for comfort or entertainment. Great projects in science, the projects of private men, will once again begin. Such fortresses will possess frightful weapons to defend themselves and will have penetrated deep into the nations their antennae and their many emissaries and watchers. I think that is a great dream, but it may happen sooner than you think. With a few details off, it's what executive outcomes would have become, or Bob Dennard would have become, if the great states of Europe had been unable to stop them. And I think soon they will be unable. But this great opportunity is still some time away. Before then, there must be a great work done. I see a time soon when a few men, maybe no more than a few hundred in the whole nation, or spread out over the whole world, will embark on the mission of the great downgoing. I have praised instinct many times in this book. But life on the ascent can follow instinct, whereas if you feel yourself to be a decadent, it's very important to resist instincts that lead to pointless self-destruction. Discipline and excellence are best when they come from your own desires, not from repression. But if your instincts lead you instead to self-debasing behaviors that will hurt you, by all means resist. Just understand that this path is at most a makeshift. We should want to give birth to beings who follow the higher path in life as a matter of innate blood and desire, not out of duty. Having to spend time and spiritual energy trying to repress destructive desires is difficult and expensive. Discipline is most important, but it matters where it comes from. Unfortunately, many pay no attention at all to these two ways of discipline, but instead are concerned only with the public image of their virtue or goodness. There's next to no good in that. And the right has hurt itself considerably by the adoption of this kind of Phariseeism. I give you an example of what I mean. Many of the intelligence agencies are populated with Mormons. These men are chosen for their upright moral character, the fact that they pass lie detector tests, that they're not easily compromised, and so on. All qualities that make for bad spies. To be effective in this world you must be very well acquainted with the underworld, with criminal life, with junkies, dealers, prostitutes, gamblers, with the perviest of pervs. And this is what I mean by the great downgoing. To gain a true hold on the foundations of this trash world, a certain group among the right will have to descend in this inferno. I am firmly convinced that this is the key to overturning everything that is corrupt and the path to the great purgation. I imagine a network of brothels and gambling houses around the world, production of porn videos, and a complete penetration of the world of vice. Yes, to ensnare, to compromise, to corrupt, and above all to observe, and to know their secrets. To descend into a floating world of complete vice, and even to engage in it, as you must, if you are to thrive in this world, while keeping your head and keeping in focus the fire of your aim. Isn't this a great and very difficult achievement? This path must be only for very few are suited to it. But these few are to be among the greatest of the coming generation. This brotherhood will work instead to intensify vice, to stir up demonic passions, to sow total confusion in the heart of the beast. The increase of chaos, confusion and pressure on the Leviathan will lay it low. Imagine even a world where the people, under relentless assault of contradictory and wild claims, would lose all faith in the media and government and doctors, and believe nothing they hear through official channels anymore. This would be an order of knights of the spirit such as exists at most every 1,000 years. Slowly, maybe over 2 generations, they will work patiently, exploring and laying claims to all the sowers of the underworld, all the effluences of the Leviathan, all the joints of the lower skeleton that undergirds this world. They will take over nightclubs, bars, brothels, hotels, casinos, pornography, and much worse, and rather than live to insulate themselves from the vice promoted by this world, they will intensify it and learn to wield it as a great weapon. It is the greatest weapon in our age. Know that the Leviathan sustains itself, not by the promotion of vice, but by its normalization. But in every normalization, a great deal must be edited out. This is its great weakness. This order of knights will keep vice true to itself. From underneath comes all the satanic power of the Babylon we are fighting. Some men, whose bond between each other must be made of titanium, will surely come around who can descend in that world. Who have the mental and spiritual resources to descend to the underworld and come back with a prize. I am sure this covenant, this brotherhood of the damned, when they are first taking steps to descend, will feel like the great mystery of things will reveal itself in its fullness to them, not the answer, ungraspable by the mind, but just this the madness inherent behind things, will show itself as they are about to descend. It will be an amazing rush, like when great pterodactyl cryptid bird of prey in Congo is about to swoop down in the night on its target from canopy. I know such men of bronze exist. I dream that, as they descend they will keep their eyes above on the great North Star, and I think about how they will feel. I imagine how they will traverse the great labyrinth of shadows, while their spirit fixes itself with a great focus and obsession on that fateful star, and that other one. The destroyer of nations. Never forgetting the way back. Not forgetting its call and the eternal task it whispers into those with ears to listen.